What we're going to be doing today is getting a little bit more into Proverbs and also talking about, last time what we started discussing was from a cognitive neuroscience perspective. How do we define rational thought? Okay, what are the components of rational thought, which are a component of wisdom? And we got to one last time. We got to the first one. Today we're going to get to a few more. All right, and then go into some more verses on the subject of wisdom, both New Testament as well as Old Testament. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. We talked about this last time, and the idea being this was wisdom speaking in the book of Proverbs. Where remember wisdom wasn't very kind. Okay, wisdom was like, hey, because you didn't pursue me, because you didn't do any, here I was shouting in the streets, trying to make myself as obvious as possible, and because you didn't respond, you're going to crash and burn. And when you go down, you're going to look for me, but it's going to be too late. And I'm going to laugh at you, ha, ha, ha. And one of the things we talked about was, that doesn't sound very Christian, okay? I mean, what is wisdom doing laughing at us if we crash and burn? Wisdom isn't God, but wisdom is made by God. It is a part of this universe, okay? And it's kind of the machine part of the universe, in that if we behave certain ways, if we don't do certain things we should do, and do things we shouldn't do, we are going to reap the consequences, and it's part of the cause and effect nature of the universe. Wisdom doesn't care, because wisdom doesn't have emotion. It's an it. Okay, Lady Wisdom is an it. It's not a person. Okay, and it's a brutal person. And all around us, when we see our family members and friends who are making really bad choices, what we end up seeing very often is the consequences of those choices, and they're crashing and burning. And wisdom doesn't care. Wisdom said, hey, if you had done the wise thing, you would have been fine, but you didn't. And so you get these consequences. Yeah?
How do you approach somebody that you see is making really bad choices?
Well, how do you approach somebody that's making really bad choices? I've never come across that. Boy, that's really
not as a documentation, but I mean, how would we do it?
As a friend to somebody, it is, and one thing we're going to see in some of the verses we're going to look at today, it is important as real friends to point out when people are headed to calamity. We can do it in love. It's usually, and that's a whole other subject really too. I mean, that's a whole Bible study in itself as far as confrontation is concerned. But I will say, when we are at the peak of our emotion, when we're really upset with the bad choices people are making, probably not the best time to confront them. Okay? When emotions cloud things. And it's better always to go away, get by yourself, hit your knees, you pray about what to do and what to say. After you've done that and you've asked God for wisdom, you look around and see, is He giving it to you? Okay, and if you get a sense that you've got enough, all right, then you go and you talk to them. But you pray beforehand, because when you do talk to somebody, you want to make sure that you are representing God in this, that your motives are pure. It's not that we can't trust our motives a lot of times. There are a lot of times I have felt very sure that I was totally working for God, and it was my own personal outrage, and I've messed things up because of that. And it's difficult when emotions start clouding things up. It feels a lot like God when it's not, and we really need to be very critical of ourselves before we start saying anything critical of someone else. Okay. All right, Matthew 6:11, and blue probably wasn't the best background for this slide. This is Jesus speaking, and He says, "And if you are untrustworthy about worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches of heaven? And if you are not faithful with other people's money, why should you be trusted with money of your own?" Why is Jesus saying this? Think about this. What is He talking about? What do you think? How do I focus this? Is this focused for you guys? Or is it my eyes? Is it okay? All right. What do you think? Why is He talking about this? I mean, if you're not faithful with other people's money, why should you be trusted with money of your own? Okay, all right. Yeah, people tend to want more and more and more, and it's a kind of a test. He wants to see how you handle what He's given you already before He gives you more. I agree. Yeah.
It makes me think of like people who win the lottery
and
win $1 million.
Yes.
And in 2 years they're homeless.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And that is the standard, by the way. The standard is multi-millions, and it doesn't take very long. 1 year is a bit fast, but it can happen. Money goes very rapidly. So yeah, that's very true.
What is that? Or what,
Matthew?
What Bible is that?
Oh, probably that's Message. The Message. Okay, Peterson. All right. If you're untrustworthy with worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches of heaven? That's what I'm focused. The true riches of heaven. So he's not actually talking. I mean, money is part of it, okay? But he says, who will trust you with true riches of heaven? What are the true riches of heaven? What is that? If it's not money. I submit, yeah. Okay, I don't know about salvation. That's a good one. But it is. I mean, salvation is a riches from heaven. But I think that they already have that because they're in the door already. I suspect that salvation, I think he's speaking mostly to believers. But maybe not, because there are Pharisees in the audience. So I didn't think of that, but it could be a riches from heaven. I mean, it is obviously a rich thing from heaven. It comes from heaven, and it's a rich thing. So yeah. I mean, grace, it's rich in grace. Right, what about wisdom? I mean, that's a part. I mean, I think I think that when I read that, it kind of stood out, and I think that's a true thing. That if we are faithful with what we know and what we have, he gives us more. And one of the things he gives us more of is enlightenment and fulfillment. Enough love and belonging, enough purpose, enough respect by others, enough self-respect, enough freedom from excessive manipulation, and enough enjoyment, enough joy, and all these other positive emotions. So it's yes, all the riches from down here, but as far as heaven is concerned, it's like the grander scheme of things, so that you become wealthy all around. But a lot of that does mean, I think that wisdom is included here. Okay, being responsible with what we have it opens the door so that God can give us more wisdom. All right, yeah.
Well, similar is with the talents.
Yes,
when
yes.
he gives that out, even those talents, but as a parable for something else, of course. But it's still, he's saying that if you use it, you get more, and if you don't, you get it taken away.
You get it taken away. Yeah, that's the other thing.
That applies to the wisdom.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I know of people who, when they start out, you might look at them and think, well, they don't have very much. They're operating on one cylinder, and then you graduate, and years later you come back and see them, and you're like, wow, they've blossomed. They're achieving a lot. They're doing a lot, and they're a much deeper, wiser individual. And then there are other people that started out with whatever, and you come back 20 or 30 years later, and they haven't grown a bit. They are smaller in terms of their character is pretty withered. They've got some habits that have destroyed their lives, the aging process. They've aged at a very accelerated rate because of bad choices, and they're just not very bright. They have the social maturity of a 14-year-old at 60. And I've seen that before as well. And again, if we're faithful with the little that we have, we're given more. If we're not faithful, even the little that we have is taken away. No one can serve two masters, for you will hate one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Now, how do you serve money?
By always wanting it.
By always wanting it?
Not having enough.
And not having enough, okay. By being greedy, okay. All right, yeah. Yeah.
I think just by letting it, that verse is talking about it serving it or it becoming your God. It's becoming something that just feeds your mind.
It becomes something that feeds your mind. Yes. It's like your motivation for what you do becomes, well, what am I going to get out of it? How will this benefit me financially? And it's about priorities. How important is getting money over being obedient? Because think about it. I mean, if money is my top priority, I'm not going to be very generous or helpful. My time is money. So why am I going to spend time doing things that don't pay? Okay, now think about what God is asked to do. Ask us to, God is, he asks us to bend over backwards serving other people for free. And then he says, don't ask for your reward from them. How are you going to get paid then? Okay? If you serve money, that you're not going to like God very much, because his commands say you got to put out, and you can't demand that people pay you for putting out. That comes from me. You have to look to me for faith, and I'm not guaranteeing you money in exchange. And so you can see you don't have to be a scientist to figure out that if you really love money, if you really place money at the top shelf of if that's your value system where money is number one, you're not going to like God very much. All right, Matthew 6. The Pharisees, who dearly loved their money, naturally scoffed it. Then he said to them, "You like to look good in public, but God knows your evil hearts. What this world honors is an abomination in the sight of God." Now, that's a big one here, because, I read that, and I've seen this verse many times, but it really jumped out at me when I read it, because a few years ago I did a study on the word abomination, and when you look at the word abomination, it tells you what God hates. What God hates. Now, think about it. Where do we get our emotion? From God. And the idea that God feels disgust and anger like we do, that's kind of scary, because he's got a big gun. Okay? So these are things that God really detests. And to fear Jesus, who is God, come out and says, the things what the world honors is an abomination in the sight of God. And I go, whoa, man, what are you talking about? An abomination. All right, there are a number of things. This is just a brief generalization of the things that the Bible calls abominations, because it's not an infinite list. It is not an infinite list. He doesn't call everything an abomination. He doesn't. Okay, the things that are abominations are, let's see here. All right. Okay. Here's that verse there. All right. Let me skip that because I said that stuff. All right. Sexual sins of any kind are considered abominations. Leviticus 18 through 30. All right. So basically, I'm not going to spend a lot of time because we've seen that before. All those sexual sins listed in the Old Testament, those are called abominations. So any kind of sexual activity apart from marriage is mentioned. Okay. It's also mentioned in Leviticus 20. In Deuteronomy 24, it even forbids the remarriage of divorced couples. That's called an abomination. People who get divorced and go off and fool around with other people and then come back and get married again. All right. Dishonest business practices are called abomination in Deuteronomy 25, 13 through 16, as well as Proverbs 11 and Proverbs 20. Now, here's one. Oppressive treatment of others and a haughty attitude are considered abomination in Proverbs 3, 31 through 32. And in Proverbs 11:20, a froward heart is called an abomination. Now, what in the world is a froward heart? What is froward? Anybody use that word in the last week?
That sounds like pride.
It sounds like pride. It sounds like it. Froward, pride, almost rhymes. What's that?
I'm joking. I'm just joking. Never used it ever.
Ever. Okay. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Froward. Back when English was evolving, back in the 11th or 12th century, and the Vikings came over to England, they didn't have a good reputation for some reason. They didn't like them pillaging and raping and killing and all that stuff. And so they were from away. And fra, before the word became from, it was fra. Okay, so froward means from away, and it specifically referred to the Vikings. So those people who are from away, that are really nasty, froward, okay, that's where the word came from. All right, so the word means difficult to deal with, stubbornly disobedient, rebellious, antagonistic, and contrary in the extreme. So very difficult to handle. So people who are it's extreme selfishness to an antisocial degree. Okay? I'm sure you probably never met anybody like that, but, okay? So someone who is froward is just a little too aggressive, impolite, speaking too familiarly, too soon. Someone who is froward is openly rebellious, just the opposite of someone who is affable or friendly. Okay? That is considered an abomination. Why would God put that on the list? I mean, some of the other things, you get an idea as to why that might be a bad thing, but what's with this being froward? What if they had froward parents? Does he still not like them? What do you think? Well, you can turn away from what your parents have done. That's a good point. As we get older and we start getting out and seeing the bigger world, you start to learn what social norms are, and also in our hearts. There is that, and so it might be difficult. And I think these people do need to be given a little bit of grace because they've had a farther. They didn't start at 0; they started at -10. But still, you can still choose to grow, and that everybody has that choice. Yeah.
Love, which
destructive thing.
Absolutely. And I think that hits the nail on the head. It is contrary to love. It makes love very, very difficult. It pulls from the room harmony. And God, remember, God is like part machine. I mean, he's this holiness thing is built into him. And he sees something that goes contrary to what he loves. He loves it when people love each other. He loves to see people working together in harmony, using their gifts to build each other up. All right? He loves to see that. He does not like it when people walk in and suck the energy out of the room and make all the attention focus on themselves and it results in aggressive, antagonistic feelings and everything. Yeah.
The message says God can't stand deceivers.
Deceivers? Well, there's some deception involved, but the word is deeper than just deception. That's kind of it's probably not the. Yeah. There is it's all in that same idea. Exactly. Okay. Yeah.
Dearborn had a viewing of the Emancipation Proclamation this week, and I had never read it before, or that I remembered. And in it was calling basically the people who were opposing the freedom of the slaves, basically froward.
Oh, really?
They were considered.
It called them froward.
They were called, not the word, they said they were an active rebellion against the United States.
Wow.
In that document,
Oh, okay. Wow.
The attitude that wanted to continue to keep people enslaved.
Oh, okay. Did they use the word froward?
No.
Oh, okay. All right.
They're considered an active rebellion.
Okay. All right. Yes. I could say, yeah, because like if I was a slave, I would think of them very froward. It's like, what's wrong with you, man? Yeah. Okay, 6 other abominations are listed in Proverbs 6. A proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that deceives wicked imaginations, feet that are swift to running to mischief, a false witness that speaks lies, and he that sows discord among brethren. And you can see how that whole froward thing fits into that. I mean, these are people who are behaving antisocially, deceptively. These are not conducive to love relationships. Remember when we talked about type 1, type 2 thinking and part of rational thought, and this is where we pick up here with that whole concept of rational thought here. Type 1 being an immediate emotional response, a knee-jerk reaction. When we act out of convictions, that's a good thing. All right? But when we come to rapid emotional conclusions that are not based on logical convictions, then it becomes just prejudice. Right? Type 2 thinking is when we know when to calculate the answers out, and we need to understand when we can't just think about it and go based on our previous conclusions. Sometimes we need more information. Type 2 allows us to think rationally so that we make better choices. And rational thought is, again, is our ability to choose type 1 appropriately or type 2 appropriately. All right, here's a question for you. All right. Jack is looking at Anne, but Anne is looking at George. Jack is married, but George is not. Question. Is a married person looking at an unmarried person? Yes, no, or cannot be determined? Cannot be determined? Okay. After the last math problem, you're not answering.
We don't know about Anne. We need to know about Anne. We don't know about Anne.
Looking. Okay, question is a married person looking at an unmarried? Literally looking. Just looking. Is a married person looking at an unmarried person?
He's looking at Anne, but we don't know if Anne is Anne.
Okay. What's that?
I think the answer is yes.
The answer is yes. Okay, so we got a yes and we got a cannot be determined.
We have to know about Anne.
Okay. All right. Well, the answer is yes. The answer is yes, okay? We know that Anne here is looking at George, all right? But Jack is looking at Anne, and Jack is married. So if Anne is married, okay, if Anne is not married, and she's looking, okay, if Anne is married, and Jack is looking at her, then Jack is looking at a married person, okay? If Anne is unmarried, and Jack is looking at her, then a married person is looking at an unmarried person. But if she's married and she's looking at him, then a married person is looking at an unmarried person. So whether she's married or not, a married person is looking at an unmarried person.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay? But the thing is, this is what an example of, that sees right away, immediately we presume, that we do type 1. And that's one of those, it's just like the baseball question. We see a problem, and automatically our brain thinks about the quickest path. It goes for the simplest answer based on our preconceived ideas. And some things require type 2 thinking. Okay, and wisdom, again, part of rational thought is knowing when to employ that. Now, going through, there are several things that we started to getting into this last time. There are several aspects to rational thought. And when people are arguing with you about your faith, for example, very often they will resort to using irrational arguments. And it's important that you understand, okay, what does a rational argument, what does rational thought look like? Okay, 1, tendency to collect information before making up one's mind. Okay? All right. Now, hopefully, you guys have done that. I mean, your faith is based on what you know. Okay, it's not based on what you feel. It's not based on the fact that you just grew up in a Christian home, but you actually know yourself. There's some evidence to support the validity of it. All right. So we've looked it up. When somebody comes against it, very often they have not done any homework. They just know they don't like the rules, and they've seen a lot of television, and they've got the gestalt that it's a bad thing, but they haven't looked anything up. The tendency to seek various points of view before coming to a conclusion. Okay, very often part of wisdom is if we don't know an answer, we need help, then it's important to know who to ask and to listen to people that we respect when we get some answers. The disposition to think extensively about a problem before responding. Again, if we've never considered something, very often we will extrapolate an answer based on the experience that we have, but sometimes we need to think longer before we come to a conclusion and say something. And that's the whole thing of before responding. Is there a Bible verse about that?
Which one? The one you just showed?
No. Yes. There you go. That's exactly right. Yes, be quick to listen, be slow to speak, be slow to anger. Exactly. It's like we got the Bible. It says, look, don't respond so quickly. Don't respond slowly. It's okay to think about things. All right. The tendency to calibrate the degree of strength of one's opinion to the degree of evidence available. We've got opinions, beliefs, and convictions. And some people in Christianity elevate everything in their head to the level of conviction. And they say, well, that's the Holy Spirit in there. Everything I believe is a conviction. And therefore, see, a conviction is something you're willing to argue about. Conviction you fight about. Convictions you die for. You believe them and you don't waver. Nothing's going to sway you if it's a conviction. An opinion, I've got a little evidence, and that's, my feelings are going in this way. What little I have, this is how I feel. But I'm open to change. If I get more information or better data, I can always change. And a belief, I've got more evidence, and so, I'm not going to give it up real easily. But if you overwhelm me with contrary information, then I'll change. For example, that whole thing about cell phones causing brain cancer. When I first read the preliminary reports on that, I was like, you've got to be kidding. And my belief was that there's no way. I mean, it's low energy electromagnetic. Come on, the EMF field is so small, I couldn't imagine that could cause any type of brain cancer. But then when they finished the study, and I took a look at what I'm seeing here, I'm going, they've got a point here. My earlier belief was changed based on new information came out, and now when I talk on the cell phone, I hold it out here. Okay, and I don't recommend children holding them up through here because they have thinner skulls. I mean, in a few years, I think we might be seeing an epidemic of certain brain tumors because the evidence was quite good, actually. It was enough to make me change my practices. All right, so again, beliefs can change. Convictions don't change.
Are you equating convictions with facts?
Yes, where the facts are strong enough to where we say, you know what, the door is closed. I've got so much evidence that, and this is important, that I will fight for this. I will throw down for this because it's that important. I will die for this. Okay, that's conviction. We don't have a lot of convictions because convictions we not only believe strongly, but we believe are very important as well. Okay, like did Jesus rise from the dead? Was he God? And we go, those are, is the Bible the Word of God? Those are convictions. Okay, whereas the belief about, well, should you wear a hat when you go to church? Those are opinions and beliefs kind of thing. Yeah.
in determining a lot of things in beliefs, a lot of times I think a confusion is often portrayed when you have people doing research, doing, scientific study, something that's, they just didn't pull it out of their head.
Mm-hmm.
But then they use the facts that they have before them, but they present their conclusion of the facts as facts.
Yeah.
And that, I think, can get into a lot of areas like evolution.
Oh, yes, absolutely, yeah.
They're saying they
right,
this.
Yeah.
Look, we found this is a fact.
Yeah, that's why it's important. That's why it's important to even look at the studies critically and say, okay, yes, yeah. I wouldn't just take what they say. You got to take a look at how the design of the study. Well, there's an adage, the Bible is not 100% clear on everything, and where there is room for wiggle, we have to be gracious and allow for that, and to have convictions about our particular opinion on how something should be interpreted when we don't have it there. You're right. That's inappropriate. We can have that as a belief, but we don't fight and disfellowship people over differences where the Bible isn't 100% clear.
Some people do.
I know they do. I'm saying it's not. There is an irrational component to that. It's not rational though. It's not rational. Okay. The tendency to think about future consequences before taking action. Thinking about future consequences before taking action. That's part of the frontal lobe, and that whole impulsivity. And that we'll see as you go through Scripture. The Bible calls that foolish over and over again. As think about the consequences before you do this. Think about the consequences before you act. The tendency to explicitly weigh the pluses and minuses of a situation before making a decision. The tendency to seek nuance and avoid excessive absolutism. Now, this is kind of related to what you just said. The idea that everything is a conviction. There is no black and white. Everything is black or white, and there is no gray. And it's like, wait a minute. Now what liberals do and what the relativist people do is say, well, everything is relative, everything is gray. And that's what we're against, because some things are black and white. But then you have other people who go on the other side and says, no, everything is black and white. It's like, everything isn't black and white. There is gray. How do you know that? Well, look at that projector. It's gray. Oh, and it's gray. Some things are gray, okay? Yeah. All right. Well, this is my audio clip here.
Being that we are, in the church, and that, there's, the Bible, and the final truth.
Mm-hmm.
We have to say, certain things in the Bible are counterintuitive. And that notion of weighing pluses and minuses and everything, that does not work in a life by faith always,
Well, if we include, and the thing is that presumes, as Christians, we would adjust that and say, look, part of the data that we have is scriptural. And so, yes, if I do this, then what does Scripture say about this? If I do that, what does it say about that? And so, we just incorporate what we know from Scripture into our knowledge. Into our paradigm. Well, I think you got to come. See, in the practical world, though, when you have to make let's say, for example, you have a sister who asked to borrow your car, and you let her do it, and then she asks every week. Well, the Bible says if somebody asks to walk with them 1 mile, walk with them 2. Okay, you got to sit down and think. Okay, at what point are you enabling a bad behavior, and at what point are you doing the right thing? You got to talk to God about that. All right, and that's this thing which you really have to weigh and think about. You have to think, and it says, love the Lord with all your heart, with all your mind, and all your strength. There are times when you have to think. The Bible doesn't tell you everything to do.
And sometimes your strength fails.
It does, though. That's why you have to talk to him about it and then use the wisdom that he gives, and that's part of weighing the pluses and minuses. Okay, you still have to rationally evaluate the information that he makes available to you. Okay, we can't put our brains out and say, okay, decide for me, because he won't. He'll present us with wisdom, but then we still have to choose. Yeah. This is an example that I mentioned earlier about rational thought, and sometimes when people come against us, they tend to resort to irrational arguments. And we saw this earlier. I'm just going to...
What? Why won't God heal amputees? It's a simple question, isn't it? We all know that amputated legs do not spontaneously regenerate in response to prayer. Amputees get no miracles from God. If you're an intelligent person, you have to admit that this is an interesting question. On the one hand, you believe that God answers prayers and performs miracles. On the other hand, you know that God completely ignores amputees when they pray for miracles. How do you deal with this discrepancy?
See, notice what do you notice about the problem with his logic here? What's the problem?
It's kind of like saying, can God make the rocks so big?
Yes, it's like saying it's an all or none thing. Since God didn't answer their prayer to have their limb grow back, therefore he answers none of their prayers. Huh? Therefore, God doesn't, in other words, unless he deals with the amputated limb, no miracle, no intervention on their part counts because he didn't answer their prayer to break the laws of physics and cause the limb to grow back. Okay? And that's irrational. All right. Psalm 33. The king is not saved by a mighty army. A warrior is not delivered by great strength. A horse is a false hope for victory, nor does it deliver anyone by its great strength. Behold, the eye of the Lord is on those who fear him, on those who hope for his loving kindness, to deliver their soul from death and keep them alive in famine. Our soul waits for the Lord. He is our help and our shield, for our heart rejoices in him because we trust in his holy name. Right, now, in that one, what we have is the idea that, think about what we face now, especially in Michigan and in the United States at a time of incredible social declines, economic decline, you name it. We're in free fall right now. And everybody's life is changing. People are losing things they didn't think they would lose. People are having to move. People are having to switch jobs or losing jobs. It's epidemic now. As we go through bad times, we also face the threat of worse times. That whole thing, that's part of a normal cycle of life, but it's been taken up a notch because of where we're at now. In our situation, it's like a war situation, because he uses a war analogy, and he says, when you're facing troops coming against you, don't put your faith in your strength, in your weapons, in your horse. These are all things that we can see to help get us out of trouble. It says, put your faith in God. And again, it focuses on what does he have to focus? His loving kindness. And that is, and I mentioned this before, throughout these wisdom scriptures, this is a repeated theme, that if you are wise, you trust not just that God exists, not just that he's real, but that he's real for you, and that he responds to you according to your behavior. Okay, that's that part of the fear of the Lord. Fear of the Lord is recognizing that if I do A, God will do B. If I do C, God will do Z. I can count on him paying attention to me. I can count on him responding to me for good or for bad. He will respond. And also, he is loving kind. And when we look to him with that trusting, respectful expectation, things happen, as opposed to looking at what we have and the resources that we have. The resources that we have are not going to save us. They're not. They're not good enough. He is. And a wise person doesn't trust in their resources. They trust in God. And it kind of goes back to that thing with the Pharisees earlier on. They love their money. Well, if you love money, who do you not love? You don't love God. Because people who love money are trusting in their money to provide them fulfillment. Money will provide me with enough of what I need. It'll give me enough love, purpose, belonging, everything. I'll get it all from my money. And you don't need God if money can provide it. All right? It all ties together. Psalm 118:4. Oh, let those who fear the Lord say his loving kindness is everlasting. Now that's interesting. Those who fear the Lord say his loving, that's like an oxymoron. You fear him and yet you're talking about his loving kindness. What's up with that? Well, it goes back to what I just said. The fear of the Lord is that understanding that he is going to respond to my behavior and that he is loving kind. So specifically, it's a respectful expectation. Fear of the Lord comes down to a respectful expectation of a response from a good God. Okay, without faith it is impossible to please God. Not just any faith will work. You can have faith that God is real and that he's powerful, but if you don't think he's good, if you don't think that he's loving and kind, that faith doesn't count. Demons believe that God exists and he's powerful. They don't have faith that's going to save them, though. Yeah. Yes, that's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying. It is out of a reverence and respect for a God that will respond. If I habitually do what I know to be bad things, he will respond. As a Christian, it will take the form of discipline. if I pursue what I know to be right, if as he's leading me, I'm following, then I'm going to get a good response. And it's going to be a very good response. And I can't say when, and I can't say exactly how, just that he is good, and it will be okay. I can count on that. That's what it means to fear the Lord. Yeah.
Not your time, but
At some point, as Christians, at some point, we all go through a desert period where God says, it's going to look like I'm gone for a while. Now what are you going to do? You're not going to get what you want, and we need to learn that we're not in control. But that still needs to be there. Psalm 147:11, the Lord favors those who fear him, those who wait for his loving kindness. And that's why I want to stop on that one. That is huge. That's a good memory verse. The Lord favors those who fear him, those who wait for his loving kindness. All right? He favors those. Man, think about what that says. That you get on his good side. But what is required there is that whole idea of expecting God to respond. As I try to be obedient, as I try to do the right thing, God responds in a positive way. He wants good for us. Well, that's important. That's important. And we don't always understand. That's when in the desert period, it seems like he's gone. All right, it seems like he's not there, and we don't understand why we're in it, but still we hang on, and still we believe that ultimately his loving kindness will be there. Okay. All right. And in the time when we are not so obedient, there is the discipline factor, which fear goes there as well.